Alright, so I figured out some more stuff with this AC system. If you might recall, when I originally started troubleshooting this, I found out that the power being provided to the compressor was, I think it was 9.6 volts. When I went and checked on my daughter's car, and that was like 5 volts. So I learned that 10 volts in this system equals compressor off. So basically, when I started this issue, the control unit was telling the compressor to stay off, which was incorrect because I was commanding it on. And I noticed some funny business with the way the controller was controlling the fan, and I didn't like that. So I ordered a new one off of eBay. I replaced that. And now I check the power down at the compressor today, and I have 2.6 volts, which is basically the equivalent. If 10 volts is off, effectively 0 volts is on. So now the command unit is telling the compressor, please turn on and do a bunch of compressing, and it's still not operating. So I spent some time on the interwebs, and I found this elaborate pressure switch. It's actually a 3-wire pressure switch for this one, and it lives up here on the side of the condenser, up in front of the radiator. And there was a few folks online who said that they found kind of corrosion and some separation here, which led them to believe it was a faulty sensor. Now this sensor is like $70, so I thought about potentially just putting one on, but then what I realized is this is sort of the beginning of the chain. This thing makes sure that the system has the right amount of pressure, not too much, not too little, which tells us that the freon is okay. And then it also measures the temperature of the charge, which tells the system how much compressor to use. So this is kind of the beginning of the signal chain, and then it goes up to the control unit in the dash, and then that sends a signal down to the compressor. So basically, I think, now this is where I'm crossing my fingers, if we see compressor on voltage at the compressor, and the compressor isn't turning on, as evidenced by the fact that the lines aren't getting hot and the AC is not cooling, and I know I have sufficient system pressure, that means that the compressor is the last link in the chain, and this is sort of the first link in the chain. This makes sure the pressure is okay and the temperature is okay, and then the controller makes sure that the controls are set to require AC, and then that tells the compressor to turn on. So all of that is happening. Our pressure is right, the controls are set right, the compressor is being commanded on, but it's not coming on. So I'm going to throw a compressor at it, which I didn't want to do because it's kind of elaborate. You have to open the system, it's guesswork, and so on. But I found the same European car parts junkyard that's close by. They have a compressor I can buy for $60, which is pretty good. That's pretty good in terms of guesswork goes, and this is $70. So if I throw a compressor at it and suck it down, get the R134 out, change the compressor, recharge it, and it still doesn't work, well then I don't know what else to do. I mean, it would probably have to be this. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to get the system evacuated, remove the compressor, take that to the junkyard to avoid the core charge, and then come back and start putting stuff together. So cross your fingers with me. I need every little bit of luck that we can muster. All right, many moons later, the compressor is out and on the bench. Here's what she looks like. And I think, if I understand this properly, I'm on the right track, because remember that this thing is always on. Every time the engine's running, the compressor should be spinning. And if I spin this wheel, that shaft in the middle does not spin. You know, this isn't really like a clutch. I think it's just bolted right from here to the input shaft, and the compressor should be spinning when I spin this, and you can see it's not. And then I thought, well, maybe that's not supposed to spin. So I put a ratchet on here, and if you listen really carefully, you can hear the compressor turning internally when I crank this. So I'm pretty sure that that means this connection between the pulley and the shaft is sheared. And I'm not sure that I'll even be able to get a clutch or anything for this, so I'm just going to carry on with the plan of the used compressor, and hopefully that resolves it. So this is the new one from the junkyard, and I think you can see pulley and shaft move together, so that's a very good sign. And if I take these plugs out here, should be able to hear it too. Yeah, I can just hear a really faint little click, so that's definitely working. So I'm going to bolt this bugger in and go about the process of getting it recharged. Listen here, compressor. What are you doing? And what? Okay. Here we go. The door's free. Wait. Okay, the compressor is all back together, lines are connected, and I should say, if you have the system open for more than like an hour or two, you should really replace the receiver dryer assembly over here, and that's because it absorbs moisture, and if it's open and exposed to the air, it's going to be able to suck moisture out of the air, and your receiver dryer will not work well. I've had this open for, I don't know, maybe an hour total to do that compressor swap, so not too bad. But I'm going to hook up my vacuum pump now to the high and the low ports, hook up the gauges and all that business, and we're going to suck a vacuum down on the lines, and then we're going to leave it. And what that's going to do is two things. The first thing is, as it sucks it down, it's going to pull all the air out of the system, and as that turns from ambient pressure to a vacuum, it's going to make any water or moisture that is in there, it's going to make it boil, and then it's going to vacuum out that vapor. So really what we're doing is getting all the gas out, all the air, all the water out of the lines. And then once you get it to that point, you maybe want to let it run for like a half an hour or something like that, and then you shut the valves and you just leave it, and you check the gauges again, and you make sure it holds that vacuum. So that's basically a leak check then. All the fittings will be under vacuum, and if your gauges don't really move, then your system is tight and closed, and you can proceed with filling. Here's the setup we have going on. Vacuum gauge manifold from our friends at O'Reilly tool rental program. High and low hooked up over here to the ports. Valves are open, and then they come up here. These valves are closed. And then this yellow one runs down to our vacuum pump, which also comes to us from O'Reilly. So we're going to turn this baby on, and then we're going to slowly open our valves and watch and see how the vacuum progresses. You can't really see it on the high side gauge because it doesn't really go to zero, but the low side gauge you can see actually goes down into negative, which would essentially be vacuum. So we're gonna wanna see that needle go down into the green zone there. I think the max we'll get to is like 12 or 14. But let's give it a go. So now I'm gonna apply vacuum to the manifold. I can do this with my left hand, probably can't. So now the manifold is under vacuum, right here. I'm going to open the low side. And you hear the pump just changed pitch. Now it's actually sucking into the negative there. So that's good, everything's working as it should. I'm gonna let it run for a while. I'm also gonna open the high side and just see if that does anything to us. It shouldn't really, but I do want vacuum applied to both sides. I don't know if there's any sort of you know, check valve or some kind of regulator that might hold it on one side. So I'm gonna run vacuum on both of these for 30 minutes. And then we'll close it down up here and just see if it goes down. But looks like we're around 20 already on this side. That's a good sign. While that's running over there, I can show you what I have in mind for charging the system. So obviously it's R134A. This car needs 500 grams, and I can see that by a sticker. Every car has something like this right up here, 500 grams, and it should somewhere tell you the oil as well. I think it needs like 5 cc's of oil, something like that. So I'm going to try to aim for this. It says plus or minus 20 grams, but I'm going to aim for 500. And that is a measure of the weight of the Freon that's going in. So you can see this guy here is 340. So I'm going to try to do a can and a half, essentially. I don't know how I'm going to do a half, but I'll figure it out. And then also I'm going to add this first. This is a little bit of oil, and that's because I don't know if there's any oil in the compressor or the dryer. Now this is only going to add 1 ounce of oil, 1 ounce of ice 32, whatever the heck that is, and then 1 ounce of R134A. So I'm going to put this in first, make sure there is at least some oil in the system, and then I'm going to put in essentially a can and a half, aim for 500 grams. And then I should be able to tell by looking at the pressure. If you recall from earlier, we checked the system pressure, and I think I was at like 70 or 80 psi, something like that. But there's a conversion for the ambient temperature, and I'll just make sure I'm at the right pressure. That's not the best method. The best method would be to actually weigh the amount that I'm putting in and then be very, very precise. So I do have to cut corners there, but I guess it's part of the deal with working on your own stuff, right? Hopefully that'll do, essentially. Another thing we can do while that's sucking down the AC is I can brief you on the oil pressure situation. Previous video, I think, maybe this video, I don't know what day it is anymore. So when I bought this car, the oil pressure sending unit was actually the wrong sending unit, and the connector that plug into it was broken. So I got the right sending unit, and I got the connector to connect okay, and that made the oil pressure light turn off. But it actually still comes on when you're slowing down from freeway speeds and you come to a complete stop. The engine's really hot, the oil's really hot, and you come to a stop, the oil pressure light will go off, which makes me nervous. So I bought a oil pressure gauge set, which I thought would be sweet, and I guess it's a sweet kit. But what happened is when I hooked it up, you know, it was at 0. I start the engine, it went up to like 40, 45 or something like that, and then after about 30 seconds it fell to like 20, and then it just kind of sat there, and I thought that was weird, maybe I would drop farther or something. So I hit the release button here, and some oil came out here, and this fell to like 5. So then I realized that this thing is not sensitive enough down here to really accurately measure the oil pressure. I had to keep hitting this release button, and every time I revved it up, the needle would go up and then it would just sit there, even though the engine slowed back down until I hit the release button. So this does not give me a good representation of actual oil pressure. So that was kind of a bummer. I was hoping to get independent, you know, information other than the idiot light on the dash. But from reading in forums, there can be a lot of stuff going on with this. You can have a weak oil pump. You can have a situation where the oil can't get through the screen on the pickup. There can be crap in there that blocks the pickup screen. So I might have to pull the pan off of this. So after I found out that the gauge wasn't going to work, I'm going to move on with my life. But another thing that people on the forum say is that the filter can be a problem. If you have a really cheap off-brand filter, it can reduce your oil pressure. They can actually collapse because this is not a metal filter body. It's just the element type, like this. So if you get the wrong brand, it can collapse in on itself. And another thing I'm going to do is change the oil, because if you have the wrong viscosity in there, like let's say they put 520 in there instead of 540, that can result in lower oil pressure. And I'm actually going to try this too. This is a little bit of a risky move here. I'm going up to 550, and usually what I use is 540. This is a bit weird. This is a risk for me, because if you have low oil pressure, that means something's wrong. Usually it means you got a weak oil pump or your bearings are worn out. I'm 90% sure the bearings aren't worn out in this, because according to paperwork in the dash or in the glove box, this engine was replaced at 80,000 miles. So this block has 30,000 miles on it. So I highly doubt that the bearings are worn out. So I'm kind of thinking what we have here is something funny, like a collapsed oil filter or like the wrong oil that got put in it. I don't really think I have a big mechanical problem. I could be wrong, and I'll find out, but this is just a step in that direction. I'm going to change the oil, and I'm going to actually bump up to 550. And the reason that's a risk is because this is heavier. If everything is okay in the engine, this is going to increase oil pressure, and it's going to change the flow characteristics because it doesn't flow as much, technically speaking. So I'm banking on the fact that this will bump my oil pressure up a little bit, which is all I need to get over that threshold of the idiot light, and it won't jack it up enough that it's going to hurt anything. So this is a risk, but I'm going to change the oil with this. I'm going to run it for a couple of days and just see if it gets better, and then if it doesn't, I will know I need to drop the pan and clean the oil pump pickup, or probably replace the oil pump and clean the pickup. And I believe there's an upgraded version too, but that's what I'll do if plan C doesn't work. Plan B didn't work, and plan A didn't work when I replaced the sensor. But anyway, such is life. It's been about 30 minutes. You can see we're still hovering right around, I think that's 24. And don't listen to me when I said 12 or 14. Obviously, I should not be trusted. So what I'm going to do now is close this valve and turn off the pump, and that will keep all this under vacuum, and then I can just watch and see if that goes down from 24, and down would be back towards 0, which would indicate I have a leak somewhere. And the tricky thing is the leak in your system, or is the leak in one of these guys? Because, you know, these get pretty beat up and stuff too. So we'll do that now. Let's see what happens. So close the valve. And shut this bugger off here. It's getting pretty warm. Yep, it's immediately falling. So what the heck? I might have a leak, or I might have a fitting leaking. I'm not sure yet. Yep, went right back to 0, which is bad news bears. So I'm going to turn the pump on again, pull that vacuum again, then I'm going to close both of these valves. And in that way I will at least isolate right here, and I'll still have these hoses and the fittings in the car, but I'll get rid of all the connections at the manifold that could be leaking. So now the idea is I've closed these valves, so now the vacuum is isolated here, and I'm going to let it sit for a while, and then as soon as I open these valves, I'm either going to have vacuum there and it won't move very much, or I won't have vacuum there. At least that's the idea. I hope you can tell I'm making this up as I go along. So I open these back up because I'm very impatient, and it's at 20 right now, and it's sitting there. It's not falling like it did last time, so it could have been because I putzed with these and I wiggled them and, you know, tightened them. I tightened these again, so maybe one of those was just leaking slightly, but I'm gonna give that a while and see if it leaks now. None of my awesome elaborate plans are working. I just closed the high side and the vacuum and just left the low side open, and it still fell to 0. Definitely slower. I went off and had dinner. So now I'm going to try sucking it down again, and then I'm going to close these valves, and that will isolate everything upstream of the car. And if it still goes down, if it still leaks down, that means I definitely have a leak, you know, in one of these. There's actually a seam here with an O-ring, so those could be leaking. It can leak where this meets this. So really this is all just about me proving to myself that the car isn't leaking. Yeah, that's working. I disconnected these hoses and closed them, and it's still just plummeting. So what that means is this system with the pump and the gauges and the hoses is not capable of holding a vacuum by itself. So I can keep troubleshooting and try to find you know, a cause of the leak, but ultimately I might lose 4 hours doing that. So the trouble is now I have to try to balance, you know, like if this system can't hold a vacuum, how can I know that the car can hold a vacuum? I can't. So I'll put a little bit more time into trying to get this thing to hold a vacuum all by itself, but otherwise I'm just gonna have to risk it, I guess. Which I should say, it probably holds a vacuum, right? Because the system was full. It had 70 psi or whatever in it the last time I checked it, and I just touched the connections down at the compressor. So the chance of one of those leaking, I guess there's a chance, but it's probably low. Okay, so I shot this bugger in there. I pulled this down with the vacuum, so the lines were actually had a vacuum. And oh, by the way, when I hooked the lines back up and opened the valves, this side still had a 20-inch of mercury vacuum, so that also makes me feel better that this is holding, because it just held vacuum by itself for like 30 minutes. So the vacuum was pulled down, and then I hooked up my old school hose here and I shoved this in there, and the whole thing went in. So that's really just mostly a little bit of oil, and I think it was 1 ounce of R134. And so now what I'm going to do is get ready to shove this guy in, which should give me 340 of the 500 grams I need. But I want to start the engine, because when the compressor starts running, it distributes the refrigerant through the system, and it makes it easier to charge the system. Like the compressor will actually kind of pull the stuff out of the can. If I was to just run this in right now, you're going to end up with, you know, a solid section of refrigerant that the compressor has to like overcome. So it should be easier if I have the engine running. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, you can tell it's starting to work. The air coming out of the vent is actually feeling cold, and I'm making sure both of my fans are running. This is one of them is just about the temperature of the radiator, but the other one is about AC. So if they're both running, that's a really good sign. I'm sure my charge is still low, so I'm going to keep adding to that. according to this wonky gauge that I don't really trust, I'm only at 30 psi, so we'll keep going. It should be low still, but it's going the right way. That's very encouraging. The air is actually getting cold. And I'm running a car in an enclosed garage, so might have to open the door pretty soon. Okay, looks like we're making progress here. Our low pressure is 33, 34. Our high pressure is about 160. And they are fluctuating just a little bit, but not much, because that compressor stays on all the time. The fans are on, the compressor's on. Ideally, everything just maintains status quo. This line is getting pretty cold. This one has frost building up on it right here. So that's a good sign. And then if we come around to our air, it is cold, and our thermometer is reading 38 degrees. So that's pretty good. I think that'll work on a hot day. I think I'm gonna let it go a little bit longer and just see if these pressures change. I'm still not totally sure how much Freon is in it, because I have this and this in there, which this one is 340 and this one is 85, so I'm at like 425 and it's supposed to be at 500, so theoretically it should be a little low, but I'm not sure yet. We'll give it a bit more time. So I shut it off and let the pressures equalize, and we've landed around 65 psi on both sides. And I seem to recall the pressure was a bit higher than that on a previous day when it was colder. It wasn't quite so hot, so I'm expecting it to be higher. I'm gonna go look it up on the interwebs, but I think it should be probably up around 80, which would mean that my system is still a little bit low, which jives with the weight on the canisters. So I'm probably going to put that other can in there, or at least half of it, and get my pressure up a bit more. So I added about roughly a third of that can, I'm guessing, and the pressures went up a little bit. I think I'm looking around 36 and 202 or something right now. But the static pressure went up about 10 psi, so that's probably good. According to everything I can find on the internet, these pressures are right where they should be for 82 to 85 degree day. So I'm feeling good. It's definitely working, and the air inside is quite cold, so I'm sure my son will be pleased. Now all I got to do is put this thing back together, do the oil change, and see if that bumps up my oil pressure at all. Something's not right there. It looks really watery, almost like coolant. Maybe. Yeah. I did notice the oil was over full. It's possible we got like a head gasket issue. Or the oil's super thin or something. Somebody put the wrong stuff in it. I don't know. I didn't find oil in the coolant, and you'd think I would have some symptoms by now other than the oil pressure thing, but let's change it and see what happens here. Yeah, that's not the right color. It's very almost olive green or pea green, and it's not the right viscosity. It's like too transparent, I guess. So I don't know what this is. It could be as simple as just the wrong fluid, which would be good for my oil pressure situation, but it could be indicative of like a head gasket issue too, because it was a bit over full, not a lot, but a bit. We'll change it out here and see what the end result is. If this was the wrong fluid, you know, if they put like I don't know, if they accidentally put some coolant in the oil or windshield washer fluid or something like that, just somebody being a knucklehead, we could get some weird stuff going on here. See how kind of brownish and grayish it is instead of black like it usually is? Something's funny there. Not sure what to think. It's too watery. So here's what I found in the filter. I'm not happy. I mean, this isn't horrible. Sometimes you see just powder and chunks in here, in which case the engine is in bad shape, but I think you might be able to see that ring. That is some debris that dripped out of the filter housing. So I can't really tell how bad it is. There's a little bit of stuff in the filter, but it's not horrible. I'm not sure what to do. Good times. It's true, I got a little freaked out while doing the oil change. I didn't like the glitter that came out, and I also didn't like the color of the oil. So I called my brother-in-law because he is a big Volkswagen Audi guy, and we just had a long chat about everything. And I also looked through this novel of information on the car, and essentially we went from, oh my gosh, the engine's full of glitter, it's catastrophic failure, you know, get rid of it, sell it, scrap it, junk it. And eventually we landed on all this glitter is left over from previous catastrophic failures. Because when you go through all that paperwork, about 15,000 miles ago, this entire engine was disassembled, new bearings put in, new oil pump, all kinds of stuff. I mean, everything. Pistons, rings, cylinders honed, everything. And then 8,000 miles ago, the turbo was replaced, along with several other parts. And then just like 3,000 miles ago, the valve cover was replaced. So really, this engine, in the last 15,000 miles, has had $9,000 spent on service at various Audi shops. So the glitter I'm seeing, it doesn't mean the bearings are coming apart. It doesn't mean, you know, the engine's shot. I'm pretty sure it's left over from the historical trauma that this has been through. So I'm less worried about it now than I was before. I still don't like it, but there wasn't a lot of, you know, big stuff. There wasn't a large quantity in the oil filter. It's just kind of like residual stuff, I think. So what we're gonna do is two things. I'm gonna finish the oil change without crying. I've already ordered a cam follower that goes under the high pressure fuel pump, because this thing runs off the cam that's in here. And there was some problems with the hardness of the cam and the hardness of the follower, and there was a mismatch, and it created a ton of wear. So there's a new updated follower. I'm just going to install that. I think it was 14 bucks. And then we're going to inspect this high pressure area. At least that's what my brother-in-law calls it. There's some cam components in here that we can look at. And probably take the valve cover off and just look for signs of wear on the cams and the valves, the lifters. And that should tell us, hey, things are not failing in a catastrophic fashion. It's just leftover glitter from the previous explosions. So we're going to do that. And then the other thing we're going to do is flush the engine using some cheap oil some cheap filters, and perhaps even a little kerosene or ATF, some sort of detergent, just to do like 3 oil changes back to back. We'll dump fresh oil in it and a clean filter, let it run for 5 minutes, drain it, do it again, drain it, do it again, drain it. And that way we should be able to get the glitter out, at least, you know, most of it. So we're probably going to do that in the future, but for now I'm going to finish the oil change. I'm going to put all this business back together and get it out on the road and enjoy the ice cold AC. Assuming that still works, who knows. Well, I think it's time to bring this video to an end. Long story short, the AC stuff is working well. I replaced that compressor and the control unit in the dash, and that did resolve the issue. It's really quite cold, and yesterday it was about 100 degrees and 200% humidity, and it worked really well. So that was good. And the other thing that's happening right now is that oil situation. You know, this was the first oil change on that car. I was quite disconcerted by the color of the oil, the viscosity of the oil, and the glitter that I saw in there. So I did end up changing the oil with 5W50, and that seemed to work. The oil pressure light turning on is gone. Well, at least it was until yesterday. We put about 3 hours of driving on this car, maybe 50 miles, and it never came on again until just last night. My son and I went to practice parallel parking because his birthday is next week, and as we were coming home, the light came on. So I'm a little frustrated about that. But, you know, I've been talking to my brother-in-law that I mentioned, and we have another idea, which is potentially the high pressure fuel pump, which is here, is leaking fuel out the back of its body into the valve cover area, which then gets into the oil, dilutes the oil, makes it really thin, and overfills it. Because that's the other thing, if you check the oil level, it's already high by a little bit, and I didn't overfill it when I did the oil change. So that seems like a solid maybe, but I'm going to leave it for now. I don't think I have any immediate concerns. We're going to get this thing through the driver's license test next week, and then I'll probably pick this up on another one. So that puts us at mostly resolved oil pressure, definitely resolved AC. The exhaust is okay. It's still got a bit of a rattle to it. I'd like to replace the muffler, but I'm not going to worry about that yet either. It's definitely good enough for a teenager, right? First car. So anyway, that's about it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.